Buckle up, folks. Big one in the 2024 Heat Check series today, Ron Holland II. A former 5-star and the number 2 ranked player per RSEI, Holland has long been heralded as one of the best players in his class. He was originally committed to Texas before decommitting due to a coaching change and going the route of the G League Ignite. He stands at 6'8". I'll be curious to see if that holds up, and he'll be still 18, really close to 19 on draft night. After suffering a thumb injury, his season with the Ignite is officially done, but he's expected to have a full recovery and full pre-draft involvement. Through 31 games, he's averaged 18.4 points, 6.5 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 2.3 steals, 0.8 blocks, while shooting 46, 25, 74% overall. Here's how Heat Check works. I'm going to identify one draft prospect and grade them on what I believe to be the most generally important skills and aspects of their game: athleticism, scoring, defense, passing and playmaking, and overall feel for the game. After those 5, I'll grade one additional skill relative to that prospect that I think is going to have the biggest effect on their stock. That will be deemed the swing skill. Each skill will be graded on the Heat Check chart with ranges from freezing all the way to scorching. When that's all said and done, I'll divvy out one final overall score. Starting with Holland's athleticism, I've given him a scorching grade. I think his combination of verticality, lateral quickness, pure speed, acceleration, and more make him not only a really good athlete, but an exceptionally functional one. With 44 dunks in 31 games, Holland is the definition of an above-the-rim forward. He can take flight and is generally pretty good about timing his leaps. I think he's got a good and replicable first step, he's deceptively quick, there's some bull in a china shop energy, but when you couple that with his leaping ability, it makes him really dangerous in the paint. And I want to make it clear this is not a case of only seeing the good stuff in the open floor. Holland is very capable of utilizing his athleticism on a possession-to-possession basis. In traffic, in transition, on defense, he wows often. Many think his general movement is a little stiff or awkward, and I can kind of get there, I can see it, but I personally see a lot more good than bad in that regard. Body control and coordination are probably some improvement points, but I'm factoring those things getting better with time for an 18-year-old. He's of course not on a Thompson twin level of athleticism, which is now the gold standard, but he'd be an above average NBA athlete, certainly. Offensively, I've gone with a warm scoring grade for Ron Holland. I leaned hot with him averaging just under 20 points in a pro league at 18, but ultimately landed more in the median range. Holland is at his best using his aforementioned athleticism to get downhill, nab paint touches, and finish at the rim. Obviously, the open court is ideal, but he's got enough touch and general control typically to make it count anytime he can get there. There's a combination of things that make his downhill attacks so devastating. His pure speed and acceleration, he takes really long strides, has that bounce we talked about, and the hang time to match. His overall finishing at the rim hovered around 60% in his time in the G League. Per synergy, he ranks good as a transition player, scoring 182 of his 571 total points there at a 63% rate. His handle isn't yet good enough to make him a full-time ball handler, as we've seen a lot of his shortcomings stem from the Ignite thrusting him into just that. I personally think as the game slows down for him, that will tighten up. The bulk of the rest of Holland's points came from spotting up and as the pick and roll handler, flashing some pretty decent stuff in the latter. The other 2 levels leave a lot to be desired. After grading good across the board around the rim, he ranked poor on jumpers, dribble jumpers, and below average on all catch and shoot shots. Simply put, his shooting and live dribble game is not where most thought it would be coming into the season, and he was definitely not ready to be treated as the 1A for the Ignite, which he essentially was all season. He shot 28% on jumpers, 27% on catch and shoot, and 27% on dribble jumpers, so at the least he's consistent. Suffice to say, there's no easy pathway towards immediate success for him on offense, but rather a mix of pros, cons, and tools that you can kind of weave into a decent offensive player. The downhill play is there. He's going to be effective on both ends in the pick and roll to a degree. Major improvement points being shooting and creating at an efficient rate. Defensively, I've gone with a scorching grade for Holland. Most simply, I think he's one of the best defenders in this class and is set to make an impact on that side of the ball in the NBA for a long time. Holland is the definition of a disruptor, able to cause pandemonium in near any situation. All the same tools as far as length and athleticism aid him on this end of the court, but what really makes him pop is his motor. He blatantly takes pride in defending, and that same instinct can make him look a little wild or out of control on offense, can portray him as a nightmare on defense. The simple stuff, 2.3 steals and 0.8 blocks per game, stand out immediately immediately. 3.1 stocks per game at any level post-high school is absolutely elite. Even if we've kind of started to give the side eye to G League competition, it's still elite. He's anticipatory in lanes, can float into blocks and takes decent angles. On ball, he overwhelms with his length, be it hounding guards at the point of attack or stifling bigger handlers. His speed is really helpful, and his footwork is really good in contrast with some of his stiffer movement on offense. The off-ball product wasn't quite as good. He does have the tendency to lose focus, maybe get caught watching some, but his potential as a speedy, swarming 6'8" help defender is enormous. And he had his fair share of incredible rotational plays in the G League, just evaporating whatever the offense was trying to do. And this especially is something he'll get more comfortable with in an extended time in an NBA system. And again, this is all made better by the fact that his motor keeps him going near 100% of the time. And he's on record saying he loves competing on defense, really love both the current product and potential in this area. I don't think anything, or at least the image of anything, was hampered more by his role with the Ignite as Holland's passing and playmaking, which I've graded warm. Despite an 85-99 assist to turnover ratio, I think Holland has some passing playmaking juice. There's times it really pops, and he's got the ability to do some advanced stuff, and he's certainly got the velocity. The good news is that a genuinely large chunk of Holland's assists with the Ignite were simply the team telling him to go make something out of nothing. Just personal draft philosophy, I'm always down for a guy who takes real chances playmaking, even if it doesn't always work out. I think it's easier to scale that down early in a career and ease your way into the hard stuff rather than players who simply don't possess that ability. Now, that being said, there's definitely passing concerns. His run and gun style does not lend itself necessarily to accuracy. He's got a long way to go as a general decision maker, and that can span across his game in general. I charted every single one of Holland's 99 turnovers. Here's what I came up with. Now, you can do this with any prospect, and it's going to make their pure passing stats appear better, but when you're talking about a prospect like Holland and scaling down his on-ball game, I think it makes sense. Yeah, it might be more of an indictment on his handle, but that's easier to put on rails than a truly bad passing game. It's just things to think about. To sell my case on Holland's skills here, I think there's a future where he's able to consistently break down defenses with a quick first step and make simple, concise passes to open teammates and intermingle the more advanced stuff sparingly. Moving on to Holland's overall feel for the game, I've gone with a cool grade. I feel like based on some of the pitfalls I've seen in his overall game, I can't justify calling him a high feel player. There's not a ton to cover here that I haven't already. I think like most of Holland's game, there's some really great stuff and a lot of room for improvement. There's flashes and there's lapses. For every live dribble correct pick and roll read, there's a bulldozing someone in the paint. Offensively, he's definitely got ball handler type feel, but not so much that I'd be confident in him becoming that sort of player down the line. Defensively, I think his feel is much better, as we've covered. He's a monster, has a nose for the ball, a nose for rotations and help, but probably not enough to justify him being a high feel player. I think there's a few different paths you could take for Ron Holland's swing skill. There's some creation concerns, shooting concerns, maybe decision making, or the ability to pull all of this together. I've gone with shooting, as this would probably be the trait for Holland that can make everything else fall into place. If there were a legitimate threat of him knocking down catch and shoot shots or dribble jumpers, that more than likely trickles down into making his creation ability look quite a bit better, etc, etc. We've already touched on the ugly stuff, 25% from beyond the arc, 27% on catch and shoot shots. I'm skeptical he'll ever be an above average NBA shooter on good volume, but I do think there's a few reasons to have hope regarding Holland's jumper. Firstly, the form isn't altogether broken. It's pretty flat, but is fairly consistent in terms of shot-to-shot mechanics, which is usually a good sign that he's not going through mental gymnastics every time he shoots. It's far from a perfect jumper, but I think that added NBA strength that comes in the first few years, especially for an 18-year-old, will make it feel a little more buttoned up. There's definitely some bad misses, but not a huge amount. Secondly, as we've alluded to all video, Holland was thrust into a pretty wonky situation, especially in terms of running the offense. He was looked at for all intents and purposes as a primary creator. This Ignite team effectively went the entire season without running a true point guard. Had that been the case, I think we're probably looking at a simpler outside shot diet and marginally better numbers across the board. And lastly, in a weird, bizarro kind of way, the volume was actually pretty decent given how low his three-point percentage was. He was just given an absolute green light, 3.5 attempts per game from beyond the arc, which, factoring in a lesser role, easier shots, the fact he's already working with an NBA three-point line and ball, and had an okay free throw conversion, I personally think that'll place him around 30% as an NBA frosh, a 3 or so a game, and plenty of workability for the future. The grade, I've given Ron Holland a grade of 8.6, the best so far in the 2024 Heat Check series and one that should land him in contention for my number 1 pick. While I'll admit Ron Holland probably feels more raw than many, including myself, thought he would coming out of high school, it's pretty understandable given he was 18 on a pro team and one that was kind of messy. I just see very little outcomes where you can't in the least mold Holland into an impactful role player as a two-way slasher. And his high-end outcome, if and when the game slows down for him, is probably an all-star that frequents the paint, makes plays on defense, and can create for others, hitting triples intermittently. Holland is obviously a pretty polarizing prospect. I won't fault anyone for not having him in that top 3 to 5 range, but I think if pick 10 or further comes around and he's still on the board, some NBA team is getting a steal. That's it for this one. Let me know what you think of Ron Holland, what you grade him, where you draft him, drop who you want to see in the next Heat Check. We'll see you later.